Hi, I'm Kate Krokou. I'm the Strategy and Partnerships Director at Hyde. Grace has asked me to record a video about my experience for International Women's Day and the theme of Women Rising. I've got to be honest, when she first asked me, my reaction was, oh God, no one wants to hear me banging on, especially about strategy. And then I thought about it for a bit and I thought, actually, I've got loads to say about things that we can all do to support people, and particularly women, to develop their careers. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So one of the first things probably to tell you about myself is that I've worked for Hyde for 17 years now. It was my anniversary on the 23rd of February, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. Now, usually when I tell people I've worked for the same place for 17 years, they look at me with a mixture of horror and fascination. So I very quickly add, but I haven't been doing the same job the whole time. I've been lucky enough to progress my career from officer level to a director today. So I thought for International Women's Day, I would reflect on the things that have helped me along the way and things that we can all do to help and support women in their careers. So my first point is about help, support and time. I joined Hyde in 2004. I joined as a continuous improvement assistant with a degree that had taught me about social policy and research, but had taught me absolutely nothing about how big organisations run, especially housing associations. The role that I joined turned out to be fantastic for learning. So I joined at a time when Hyde was preparing for short notice inspection, which those of you who've been in the sector for a while might remember. And part of my job was to help the organisation get ready for that inspection. And that meant going out and talking to people right the way across the business, learning about the different processes that we use, learning about how we work, learning about our systems, learning about what our customers think about us. And it was a fantastic opportunity to really get to know the business and to get to know what we did. After about 6 months, I was promoted to a slightly more senior role. And along the way, I took every opportunity I could to take on new tasks, to take on new challenges, to learn about things that I didn't know about before. And all that time, I was gaining knowledge and skills that were going to help me later on in my career and give me more options for things that I could do. But what really helped me in those early years was my colleagues, my managers, the people who I was working with, who were really generous with their time and their knowledge. They were happy to sit and answer endless questions that I had about how things worked and why we did things a certain way. They were happy to give me opportunities to try new things that I didn't necessarily already have experience in. And it was only by going through that process that I was able to learn enough to start progressing from that very first role that I joined in. So that's my first ask, really. We can all support people, particularly women, to rise in their careers by giving them opportunities to try new things. We can give them our time, sit down and talk through how things work, give them pointers and advice about reports or documents that they might not be sure about. And for women who are looking to grow their own career, I would definitely say volunteer for things. Don't be afraid to take on challenges that you don't know anything about, because it's only by doing that that you're going to learn and prepare yourself for your next role. So my second point is about professional development. So all roles have a shelf life, and after about 3 or 4 years working in the policy team, I've been lucky enough to try out a few different things, including a slightly more senior role by taking on a colleague's maternity cover. I was starting to think about what my next career steps might be, that I didn't want to keep doing the same job forever. I looked around at roles in other organisations and I looked at what might be required. I even went for a few interviews. And I started to realise that actually if I really wanted to make a success in my chosen area, which was in policy and research at the time, that I was probably going to need some real professional development behind me. I'd been lucky enough to do lots of short courses that Hyde offered at the time, which had really helped me with my everyday knowledge, but I needed that real professional knowledge and recognition of those qualifications. So I was very lucky. I applied to Hyde to sponsor me to do a master's in social policy at the London School of Economics, and I was lucky enough to be successful. And that meant that Hyde gave me time off to go to lectures. I was given time to study and take exams when it was that time of year. But I was also able to work at the same time. And that really was crucially important for me, because looking back now, I couldn't have afforded to do that master's if it hadn't been for the sponsorship that I'd received from Hyde. And without having done my master's, I think there are things that I've done later in my career that I probably wouldn't have been able to do without those skills and knowledge, and the recognition of my skills and knowledge that that qualification brought with it. I'm still using the knowledge that I learned in that master's, and it's still skills that Hyde's benefiting from today. So one of the things about taking on that sponsorship was it actually kept me at Hyde for another 3 years. So the 2 years that I did the course plus a year afterwards. But it also built up an awful lot of goodwill between me and the organisation, because they'd invested time and money in me and supported me to help me further my career. So that's my second point, really. We can all support women to rise in their careers by encouraging them to do professional development. And as managers and colleagues, we can support people who want to gain qualifications and who want to gain recognition for those qualifications by giving them time and space and supporting their applications to do that. So my third point, or ask, is about flexibility. When I was getting to the end of my master's course, an opportunity came up to change roles. Hyde was setting up a new business intelligence team, and there was a customer insight manager job going. And I thought this could be a great opportunity. I was a bit worried about leaving policy behind and focusing more on data and analytics and research, which I'd been doing up until that point, but it hadn't been my main area. But I thought about it and I thought, well, you know, what's the worst that can happen, really? You know, best case scenario, I change roles, I really enjoy it, I learn lots of new skills. Worst case scenario, I don't like it, I can always go back to policy. So I applied and I was lucky enough to get the job, and I was encouraged to apply for that job by managers who were in the business at the time. And I had a great 3 or 4 years. I learned loads about data and analytics, about performance management. I even started learning about data warehouses and how we structure data in systems, and how important that is in making decisions within the business and understanding what's happening. Within that time, I was also lucky I was able to progress my career. And by 2014, I was head of department. I was head of strategy and business intelligence. But I wasn't getting any younger. And me and my partner were starting to think about having a family. And I started to think about what that would mean. And if I'm honest, I was a bit worried actually about what having children would be like, how I would manage looking after young children and having a career. I'd always been encouraged by my family and by my friends that women can work and have careers, but it felt quite daunting at the same time. And while I was busy worrying about that, the universe decided to throw me a huge curveball, and I found out I was pregnant with twins, which was quite shocking and not what I had planned at all. And was a great lesson in the fact that things don't always work out the way that you think they're going to work out, but you just have to adapt and be flexible and roll with what comes. So it was around this time that I really started to understand how important it is for women who choose to have children to have an employer with good maternity policies and who are understanding and flexible. I had a lot of medical appointments. I had to finish working sooner than I would have normally done. And my manager was very understanding about all of those things and allowed me to make the adjustments that I needed. So my boys were born in November 2015. I took a full 12 months maternity leave, which was hard work, looking after 2 infants. But I always knew I wanted to come back to work. Everybody makes different choices about what's right for them in terms of working when they come back. Some women choose not to return to work, some women work part-time. I did consider reducing my hours, and I did have a conversation with my manager at the time, but they felt that as head of department, a part-time role wasn't really going to work. So I decided to come back full-time. And I have to be honest, those first 2 years back were without doubt the hardest of my career. I was completely exhausted most of the time. I was constantly juggling the demands of 2 small children and quite a demanding job. I felt the weight of having to prove that I could work and have small children, especially after somebody made a comment in a management meeting that when we were doing talent mapping, someone said, oh, well, but Kate doesn't want to progress because she's got small children. And I was really angry and upset that someone had made that assumption about me without asking. But I also, of course, felt huge amounts of mum guilt all the time, that when I was working, I should be at home. And that was really challenging. But again, it was flexibility that made that possible. So I was able to work from home when my children were ill. I was able to be flexible about when I started and finished. And that made it possible. Although I will always remember the day that I had to be at home because my children were ill, they were off nursery. And I had to present to ELT, and I ended up sitting in the car on my driveway because that was the only place in the house that I could get Wi-Fi and be sure that I wasn't going to be interrupted by two crazy toddlers. Not my finest hour, but I made it work. The paper got presented, and no one in ELT was any the wiser until I told them about it later on. But the point about my story really is about flexibility and the fact that women who do choose to have children or who have other caring responsibilities, flexibility is really important in allowing them to maintain and manage their careers. That, along with a supportive family, good but if expensive childcare, and the occasional emergency babysitting job from grandparents, even if my dad did once manage to lock himself out of the house and leave my 2-year-old son inside. I didn't shout at him too much because I had dropped it on him at the last minute, and he was doing me a favour. So yeah, being a supportive employer, a supportive manager, and having good organisational policies is really important in keeping women in the workforce once they've had children and helping them develop their careers. So my last point or ask is about encouragement, something that's been really important to me in my career. I came back from maternity leave in 2017, and by 2018 I'd been in the strategy and BI role for about 4 or 5 years, and I was starting to get that feeling of what's next and where's the next challenge coming from. And a role came up in development, the Partnerships and Regeneration Director role. And I was encouraged to apply for it. I've got to be honest, I was a bit nervous about it at the time. It was quite a big jump, so I was going from head of department to director level. And although I had some of the skills I needed to do the role, I also knew that I would need to learn an awful lot about the nuts and bolts of development. But I was encouraged, not only by managers within Hyde, but also by my mum, who's always said women quite often will only apply for a role that they already know they can do 80% of, and that holds them back. And that's always resonated with me. So I decided to apply, and I was lucky enough to be successful. So I moved over, it was the end of 2018. And it has been really hard, was a really steep learning curve. So there was lots I didn't know that I had to get to grips with. There were some things I knew more about than I thought I did. But overall, I'm really glad that I made that jump. And I've really enjoyed the challenge. And I've loved getting to know more about development and enjoying my new role. And then towards the end of 2019, actually my old strategy duties moved over to the development team, and they came back into my role. So that led me to where I am now, which is the Strategy and Partnerships Director. So when I reflect back over the last 17 years, the thing that strikes me is how important that encouragement is that I've had from friends, from family, but really importantly from managers and from colleagues who know me professionally and who've encouraged me to reach out and try new things. Each time I've applied for a new role, I've had that moment where I think, can I do this? And I think from talking to my girlfriends and my colleagues, I think that's pretty common. I think a lot of people, particularly women, do have those feelings of doubt about whether they can do a role. There's even a syndrome, imposter syndrome, which some of you might have heard of. If you don't already know about it, go and Google it. But if you do read about it, I think what it really brings home is the importance of encouraging women to try new things and to advance their careers. We can all encourage the women in our lives, our friends, our family, our colleagues, when they're contemplating a career change or a step. We can all encourage them and help them to really understand that they already have the skills to do that job. They just need to take that jump. So that brings me to the end. Probably close to where I started actually, which was, oh gosh, does anybody really want to hear what I say? But hopefully I haven't bored you. I haven't talked too much about strategy, and that you found some of what I've said interesting, and hopefully some of those points you'll take away and think about how you can support the women in your life to rise. Thanks very much.